Welcome to the Brewing Wellness Podcast, created especially for UFT members. This is a space where we pause to talk about mental health, wellness, and the realities of being an educator today. Each episode will bring you conversations, strategies, and reflections to support your well-being because you deserve care too. So let's get into today's episode.
Hello, and welcome back to the Brewing Wellness Podcast from the UFT Member Assistance Program. I'm Sean Blanks, Program Coordinator for the Dollar Teacher Program, and today we're talking about an issue that affects every part of school life, bullying. Bullying isn't only something students experience. It impacts educators, school staff, classrooms, and entire communities. Whether you're supporting a child who's struggling, dealing with challenging dynamics among colleagues, or carrying the emotional weight of what you witness each day, the effects are real. And you don't have to navigate any of it alone. In this episode, I'm joined by Carol Morrison, licensed clinical social worker and director of New Directions. We're looking at what bullying looks like in 2025, how it shows up in obvious and subtle ways, and how these patterns shape the emotional climate of our schools. We'll talk about how educators can respond without burning out and where support is available when things feel heavy. So Carol, let's begin. I know you've done tremendous work around bullying. So to begin with, how would you define bullying and what misconceptions do adults most often bring into the conversation?
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm so delighted to be here and so pleased that the UFT is bringing this out to its schools, to its members, because it's an issue that doesn't get spoken about as much as perhaps it needs to, given how much bullying goes on and how much cyberbullying goes on now. The use of technology, and more so than just, phones, but social media and texting and gaming platforms to intimidate, to harm another person. And I wanted to just sort of start by just saying that there's bullying when it's sort of a one-to-one and it's unwanted, aggressive behavior that involves either a perceived imbalance of power or a real imbalance of power. And we often see people who are perhaps have some physical challenges who are often bullied more so than others. But it also bullying has the potential to be repeated. It can be physical, which is the most obvious, but it can be verbal. It can be name calling. It can be threats that really undermine a person's sense of self-esteem. And when it's cyberbullying and there could be 30 or 40 or 100 individuals who are literally attacking somebody through the use of social media, and it happens inside the school, outside the school, it impacts the students' not only emotional self and their academic well-being, but their sense of safety, their sense of well-being. And there are ways that may seem innocent, like posting maybe an embarrassing photograph or an embarrassing video, or even setting someone up for a video, or creating fake profiles, or to maybe mock the person, group chats that also exclude the person. So there's bullying and there's cyberbullying, but what it really means is that as a community of caring individuals, that we, particularly in the school system, where bullying is so prevalent among the middle schools especially, that we really integrate not only awareness into our conversations with our students, but into our curriculum as well, to really put together what looks like a true anti-bullying policy so that people understand very early on that this is not okay behavior.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think you've given a great introduction into that. But what kind of misconceptions do you feel a lot of adults most often bring into when it involves bullying?
I think that adults miss the subtle social bullying clues, the way that young people are excluded, the way that rumors can be spread, the way that online harassment can happen. These are things that happen undercover. A child or a teen is not going to go to their parent or their caregiver and say, oh, by the way, this is what I'm up to lately, right? So there are also quieter ways of people being physically aggressive. You knock into somebody in school and you say, excuse me, but you're constantly doing that. And staff really, whether it's the staff in the lunchroom whether it's the people who are paraprofessionals, whether it is the teachers or supervisors, really need to look for changes in behavior, withdrawal, loss of interest. The student who was a B or a C student suddenly is a D student. But there's also avoidance of certain spaces. Maybe they're not going to lunchroom. Maybe they're not going outside in the yard. But paying real attention to the laughter of bystanders when somebody passes, or the whispers. It really takes listening by the person who's observing. And let's be real, there's a lot going on in the school system. There's a lot going on with our students. I think that what we can do is to really focus on a communication system between teachers and counselors. Have you noticed anything going on with Carol? And flagging things to families. Have you noticed that there's been a behavioral change? We've noticed her grades have gone down. Using classroom circles or check-ins also to give students safe opportunities to express their own concerns. Just for a teacher to say at the end of class, you can bring anything to me that you don't want to say publicly, and create a safe space that indeed is a safe space. So I think that's what we can do to respond in the moment, calmly, clearly, and in a connected way.
Yeah, I also think, and like I remember even being as a classroom teacher, kind of like not bringing our own biases in and thinking, oh, this is just a part of kids growing up. These things just happen. So it's kind of like being able to distinguish between conflict versus like harmful bullying. How do you think we can teach, educators to just recognize the difference?
Well, I think that one piece to be aware of is that this behavior doesn't come out of nowhere. And often what we've seen is that, particularly if we've known this child for a while, we may have seen behavior when they were in the 3rd grade or 4th grade that is now exhibiting itself in ways that are much more aggressive. We need to call out that whatever the behavior is, if it is hurtful behavior, we don't treat people that way. And how do we agree to have a disagreement without going to escalation? A lot of our ways of really negotiating with another person escalate into, well, I'm out of here and I don't want to talk about it. So I know that in Erasmus High School years ago, they used to have a program called Let's Talk About It, where that was the focus of the group. And where are those safe spaces within the school system where young people can bring up, I'm worried about the way I look. I'm a teen and I'm worried about being accepted. I've seen, beautiful young men and women are worried about their physical self. Are they unattractive? Or so I think that we have to start with being able to talk. And we have to start with having a clear protocol for who do they notify if they're in any kind of trouble where they need help. I think role playing is another way. Like, how can we bring in adult-led bullying prevention and even teen-led bullying prevention? You can see that this is something you can talk about, and I'm not the exception.
Mm-hmm. Responding in the moment, it can often be intimidating. What guidance would you offer adults on how to intervene effectively and safely when they do witness bullying?
There needs to be some kind of protocol for, we're going to have a timeout right now. Whatever is going on right now, this is going to stop. And there needs to be an adult in the room who can really do that. Because prevention starts with a present adult and consistent expectations and reinforcing respectful communication. You can say that to each other, but you have to lower the decibel. You have to bring that down. So how would you say that without yelling at Sean? How would you say that without yelling at Carol? And also incorporate something into our lesson plans that teach empathy, communication, and problem solving, because this confrontation is not going to solve anything. Now you're going to make this person your enemy. Mm-hmm. And you're going to snub this person, or they're going to snub you, or you're going to be afraid of them, or they're going to be afraid of you. And how do we learn not to do that? I know that my nephew, when at his school, they had 5 minutes of meditation in the morning. Every morning at school, they had 5 minutes of meditation, just to sort of help them to sort of tune into their internal state. And I think a healthy school climate grows from consistent adult presence and monitoring of fairness and empathy and a level of accountability. You can't speak to another human being in that way. I think that we need to also think about what these young people have been through in terms of the pandemic, not being able to be connected to their peers over the course of semesters, over the course of terms, over the course of years. All of that social development that would have happened in the schoolyard, all of that connection that would have happened with teachers has made sort of strangers of a place like school, where you're all about developing your social self. All of us are still railing from the COVID and the shutdown, and also the coarseness of communication that we are seeing. And so there's a certain license. Well, if so-and-so can say that, then I can say that. And I think that there needs to be a holding of a space where, no, we don't talk that way about each other. A safe space where, that may be happening outside, but we don't speak that way. And leading by some level of example. Nobody feels safe when they're yelled at. I think there's also some great videos. There's a great video of students who have, there's 2 plants in a schoolhouse. And one plant, the students would talk to the plant and just sort of diss the plant and curse the plant, and the plant began to wither. And then there was the same plant in another corner, and the students would give it praise and say lovely things about the plant, and the plant began to really shine. And I think that there's a way of bringing that to, how do you feel when someone's like, really operationalize it, really make it concrete. And you start small with this, but you build one positive connection with a child. It goes a very long way. Didn't it feel better when we had that conversation? Have them reflect on whether or not it feels better. I also think that there's a way in which young people, I see it with my nephew, who is just turning 19 now, where there's a certain like hitting one another and sort of poking at one another and jabbing at one another as a way to like show affection, rather than, particularly I think with men, there's just, even now there, I think there's less acceptability for men to show that kind of affection. But that doesn't mean that they're bullying. It doesn't mean that he's being disrespectful to his friends. And I think that really fleshing that out is important. And if we're not holding the line as educators, are we greeting our student by name? Are we listening when they speak? Are we acknowledging any positive changes that they've made? Because kids are clamoring to be seen, to be witnessed, to be noticed. Are we giving them a sense of belonging? Because that's a proven buffer against bullying. Oh, this child matters to the teacher in the room. This child matters to the school principal. The school principal drops in on the classrooms to just say, hey, how's everything going today? There are eyes. It's like eyes on the street. One of the things that made COVID even more frightening than it was that there was nobody on the street. There were no eyes on the street. So I think that's we're almost, in addition to all of what teachers have responsibilities to do, let alone teaching curriculum and getting people prepared for their professional life, they're also coaches in kind of life skills in this. And I think that leadership also has to be encouraged by peer support groups or mentoring programs, because if you're in a group that is created by young people to teach bullying in the school system, it's very different than having an adult, or particularly an older adult, teach you. I know that there are some high schools where the RAP program, the Relationship Abuse Prevention Program, goes into the high schools and talks to students about bullying and cyberbullying. It keeps it very real, because these are students, like all students, who have experienced some conflict. So I think that's an important piece, because the world is not going to change. The only thing that we have control over is how we approach that. what if in my classroom, we don't yell at one another in the same way that in my household, we don't yell at one another, or I don't raise my hands to my children? They can expect that there's some safety at school, because often there's safety at school when there isn't safety at home as well.
Absolutely. I often think now, even with the new no phone policy, how that must have a positive effect, because so much can happen in the moment with the phone. A student can walk into class and someone can immediately send a text, "Oh, look at her," or it's and so I would be anxious to see, like, down the line, like, how has the no phone policy made an effect on bullying, and it has to be positive.
Oh, that is a great point. Yes, I wonder if there's some research on that. I mean, bullying and cyberbullying is so secretive,
Mhm.
but I would imagine that also that the young person isn't distracted,
Absolutely.
right? And also, like, your phone now has become like you curate your phone. It's like my friends come in through my phone, my YouTube videos come in. It's all about me, 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 me. And when I put that phone down and I look around, there's a big world out there. And it does force me into a different kind of a relational connection with people, right? So I'm now not talking to Sean through my phone. I'm relating to Sean. That's a different moment.
Absolutely. For educators who feel almost overwhelmed, discouraged, or unsure where to start, what is one grounding step you believe they can take to support safer, more compassionate spaces for students, and what resources are available to support them?
So I know that there is a National Bullying Prevention Center. There's also the New York City Department of Education has a Respect for All, but there's a great site called Stop Bullying. It has so much information about how do parents talk to their kids about bullying, how do educators talk to children about bullying. But the best thing that that teacher can do is to ground themselves, to pause and to calm themselves before they intervene with a situation. Because on a scale of like 1 to 10, we're pretty much all operating up here at the 10, particularly in the school system. There's so many different things that can be happening at the same time. So how do I ground myself? Have I worked out today? Have I eaten sugar all day long? Could I take a break at lunch? Could I just take a 5 minute walk? Could I have 5 minutes to myself? How do I take care of myself? We put the oxygen mask on ourselves first. I think that the notion that my eyes are on everybody else and that I'm not in the equation is problematic to begin with. And I think that the notion of multitasking is a big scam, because we can only do one thing at a time. And the one thing that we need to do is ground ourselves. And over time, now there's one more problem that's come my way, as opposed to, what am I looking at here? Because there needs to be some daily practice for myself where I can be empathic to myself as well. These kids are hurting, but there's also the impact that has, the vicarious trauma that might have. The child who also has health issues, or where there's a separation at home, or where there's violence at home. All of that is absorbed. What is the place where those teachers have, where they can take care of themselves? And that for me would be a central question, because if one is so overwhelmed that they can't do that, and everybody gets to those moments, but I'm talking about living in that moment, really feeling what we call burnout all the time. And I think that the somehow teachers and other helpers or helping professionals think that somehow that shouldn't happen to them. They're experienced, and I should be able to handle it. And then there's certainly the politics of you should be able to handle it. But the reality is, there are enormous stressors and strains that the children and teens are going through. I worked in one of the schools here in Brooklyn with the Relationship Abuse Prevention Program, and the students some of them were on medication and didn't want to take medication. Their parents were in the process of separation. They didn't feel safe in their own homes. You are not a social worker, you're an educator. And yet there are a lot of very serious challenges and you feel perhaps even a level of helplessness. So how do you get your peer support? Who do you talk to? Do you really go home and speak to your family about that? Maybe not. Maybe it's something you don't want to bring home. Are you getting the support that you need? I think that is that's the other piece of it. Does your school principal have as any kind of a policy around bullying? Is there any kind of a conversation around that? Is it safe even to bring it up? Oh, Carol's being bullied, and I'm wondering how we're going to respond to that. There needs to be some support. He or she can't be out there, or they can't be out there alone. It may seem obvious, but it's really not. There's an expectation that we have that educators are supposed to take care of everything. I'm sending them off to school. They're yours. Take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of I think like when it's peer led, like the peer led role playing, when they see it with their, it just hits home a little more with them. And we have a Brave program here with anti-bullying where, they go into the schools and do workshops. And I think that type of stuff that just, continuously needs to happen just to, promote awareness and just keep it going.
Yeah, I think this is such an important conversation. And, how do we strengthen the school's communication around bullying incidents, even if they're not happening in our school, right? It's always in the newspaper, right? Or it's on the cover of People magazine when these terrible situations happen. How do we also begin to talk about the digital tools that young people are using, and how can we use this more responsibly? When I get online and I'm sending someone an email, what does that communication look like? Because that communication is always going to be online. Mm-hmm. Right? How do we lead with some sense of awareness around that? Although it may sound a little bit like off the path here, the reality is that we need to reinforce some kindness in the classroom. We need to reinforce some accountability in the classroom. Whatever's going on outside of Carol's classroom, that's what's going on outside. But in this classroom, we're not speaking to each other like that. And like everything else, you're setting a boundary, and you catch young people doing the right thing. You catch them taking time with someone who maybe isn't quite as popular. You acknowledge when they're making an effort. You catch them in action. So it's not all about what their negative behavior is, and it is negative behavior. It's about their growth. I'm really seeing that you are really worked on that. You stopped yourself from yelling. That was great. Because when you're yelling at someone or you're aggressive with someone, and it's a moment, it's not bullying, it's just a moment. I lost my cool. Did you apologize? Could you say, I'm sorry, I was hurtful? That's okay. People lose it, right? But when it's repetitive, when it's about a commitment to making that person feel terrible about themselves, that's a different story. And to really begin to flesh that out with someone, what is that about? Because that young person that's doing that is hurting. You may not want to get close to them because they're being hurtful, but they're hurting.
Absolutely. And like you said, I think the school climate is so important also, because it's like, how do you, even if I see a colleague doing something and they didn't address it, how do myself approach a colleague for ignoring something? And that can be really, really tricky. So like the school environment has to really be a place where that stuff is welcome, where you can feel you can approach a colleague that may have missed something.
Absolutely. And I do think that it's either a spoken or an unspoken contract that the administration makes with the school and the school paraprofessionals, the school teachers, the lunchroom custodians, the people who are taking care of the physical structure of the school, that everybody needs to be in that auditorium and everybody needs to be on the same page. It's not just the teachers, it's everybody. And at some point, everybody, including the students, needs to be on the same. It really needs to be a campaign. Here, that doesn't fly. And I also feel like if there's a one banner up, it's not enough. There needs to be a banner in every classroom. Bullying is not okay. And you can go to any of these websites and download these posters and put them up in your classroom. And once kids see that, they know what that means.
Culture is important.
Yes, exactly. So we have a culture here that says that's not okay. And if I want to belong here, and what child does not want to belong? What teen does not want to belong? Right? There's a sort of group mentality of, oh, I can be aggressive because 4 or 5 of my peers are being aggressive. But that individual young person may not want to be aggressive. It's just that they want approval of the other 4 or 5 of their peers. Well, what if the culture in the school is, that's not okay, that's not acceptable? And that's literally, it may seem like, well, Carol, you're really asking that we like turn what the culture is on its ear and ask us to like do something that's completely like different than what is going on in the real world. But the real world is pretty dysfunctional if we have kids that are being aggressive and dangerous to one another. There's something wrong with that. So I think that it's also challenging, and it's having some courage to challenge that, to lead with empathy and compassion for every student, because the bullies learn this from somewhere. And often they, having done a lot of presentations on this, the bully has learned this from their caregivers.
Wow. Carol, this has really been a great conversation. What would be some of your final thoughts you'd like to leave with us?
I think that the most difficult point here is to start to really notice what's going on in the classroom and to have a conversation about bullying and to ask kids what they know about it and what they know about cyberbullying and whether they feel they have a place and a space where they can talk about it, and then really learn to listen. I think the listening piece is key, because you can say you're listening, but if you're not listening, kids know it. And kids have a great way of keeping us real, right? So I think also putting it in words putting the information on the shelf so they can reach it, keeping it real for them. How have you experienced that? Is anybody in the room who's experienced it and doesn't want to talk about it? And maybe even do a little bit of like a private survey. Just begin the conversation, because if we don't ask, we will never know. That's for sure.
Right. So again, I'd like to thank you for your time and for joining us today. This has been very informative, and we thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you to UFT and to Jocelyn and to your students who have the courage, and they are our future. And for them to be courageous and empathic, and for them to be able to communicate with one another, it's the most important gift that we can give them.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation. So we hope you found something to take away from this into your work or your life. At MAP, we believe that caring for yourself is an essential part of caring for others. To learn more about the services we offer, from counseling to support groups and wellness programs, visit uft.org/MAP. Until next time, be well, and remember you are not alone, and MAP is here to support you.